All right, so reporting from an old stomping ground of mine, the bicycle casino, otherwise known as Park West now for whatever reason. Before I stopped playing here, I had a bank-like account thing, a player account, whatever those things are called. And despite the fact that I haven't been here in a while, I have some money left that I've been meaning to pick up. It's 11 p.m. and I thought, you know, there's no traffic. Why don't I come pick up this money? It is around $16,000, I believe. But instead of just picking it up, I'm going to gamble with it. We're either going to double it up or lose it all. And I thought you guys might want to join in on that. So without any further ado, let's head inside and play some 10-20 or whatever's going on. See you guys in there. Alrighty guys, here we go, playing 10-20, and I get happy news right when we sit down that the 40 is on. So this is actually a 10-20-40 game. I start with $16,800, and here we go. We are underway in this first hand. There's an early position open to 100, and I look down at Ace-King in the big blind, aka the middle blind, if you will. I raise it up to $400. Raising with Ace-King really needs no explanation. But when it gets back to the initial raiser, he makes it more. 1,050 to be exact. I make the call with Ace-King offsuit. We are pretty deep. You could make a case for, I guess, raising again once in a while, but being super deep, Ace-King offsuit is not the best hand in the world. So I decide to see a flop, which is not great. 9-8-4 with 2 hearts. I check it over to him and he bets $500, a little less than a quarter pot. Even though we completely missed this flop, we could still have the best hand often and are getting a good price to continue. So I make the call, but definitely not in love with the situation, and even less so when the turn comes the 2 of hearts. I check it again, and this time he continues for a bet of $1,500. And I just fold right away since this is probably the worst board I could have imagined. In the next one, the button opens to $100 after action folds around to him, and I'm in the small blind looking down at Ace-3 offsuit. A little bit too loose, if I'm being honest, but I decide to raise it up to 400. Main reason being that the player on the button in this particular hand is someone I've played with quite a bit over at Mariano Casino years ago. Someone I'm happy to give action to, so that said, I make it 400. Plus, I've got Ace-3. How bad could it really be? I guess we'll find out because my friend on the button makes the call, and we go heads up to a flop of 8-8-4 with 2 spades. Pretty inconspicuous board. I'm not sure if I'm saying that word right. I think I just learned it last week. Anyway, I continue for $400, right around half pot. My opponent makes the call, which is not ideal. I was hoping to fold out better ace highs or hands that have good equity against mine, like, say, Jack 10 suited, for example. But that's not the case. He comes along again, and we see the 5 of diamonds on the turn. Could go either way now between continuing to bet or checking, but I think this exact situation favors my opponent a little more, not just because I've got Ace-3, which is a whole lot of nothing aside from a straight draw, but mainly because this board is going to hit him a little more often than it'll hit me. And I would also be checking some overpairs, so I think it's okay to wave the white flag with his exact hand. That's what I do. I check it, and now he bets $900. I find this bet a little bit odd. I have played with this player quite a bit, and I think this bet either indicates a strong hand, like pocket 10s or better, or a bluff, like, say, spades, for example, but really nothing in between. I think if he's got a middling hand like pocket 7s or 9s, he would just check back. Maybe an Ace-5 suited type of hand that makes a 5 on the turn. You know, those types of like middle strength holdings, I think he would have just checked back. So I'm a little curious to see what's going on here. I make a light call in hopes that we still have the best hand. Could always hit an ace or a 2 as well. River's the queen of hearts. Pot's pretty big at this point. I just realized maybe this was a little bit of a punt on the turn, but I check it over on the river, and my opponent checks it back. That is not good. I was hoping to see him bet again. That might have given me some hope that we actually have the best hand with ace high, but once he checks back, doubt he's doing that with anything worse than ace 3, and sure enough, he's got himself pocket jacks. So we are 0-2 to start the night. Let's see if we can finally get on the board with this following hand, which if you thought ace 3 offsuit was bad, this is even worse. I double straddle to $100. The button limps in, and I make it $500 when it gets to me. You might be wondering, why did I do that? I am also wondering that, but my opponent on the button makes a call, and we go heads up to a flop of 9-5-2 all clubs. A complete whiff for me. That's the third hand in a row we just cannot connect with the flop. Of course, can't really complain because I'm playing rather mediocre hands, but you know, you're still going to hit once in a while, even if you don't play the best cards. Anyway, I bet $500 on this board. Just trying to buy a pot here, hoping my opponent didn't love this flop, even though I didn't either. And it seems it's going to get through this time. He folds right away, so not a whole lot of action in this one, but it does feel good to finally add chips to our stack instead of taking them away. And the next one, the small blind opens the action when it gets to him. I look down in the straddle at 6 deuce of diamonds. The small blind only made it $110, so it's $70 additional for me to call. Against a small sizing, I think defending suited hands in position is okay. 6-2 is a little too weak. I think re-raising is probably stronger than just calling, but this time I just call for whatever reason. And we go heads up to a flop of Jack 10-9 with 2 diamonds. So not bad for the old 6 deuce suited. We flop a flush draw. My opponent continues for a bet of $150. And with some other flush draws, maybe if the board had come a bit lower, I might consider raising, but this is still a board that's going to favor him much more than me. So I just call, and we see the 5 of diamonds on the turn. Don't have to wait at all to make our hand. I'm expecting my opponent to check at this point, but I'm surprised to see him bet $325, no less. Over half the size of the pot. Kind of an interesting spot now. Of course, we've got a super strong hand, so raising doesn't seem like that bad of a play, but I think just calling also has plenty of merit. If he's bluffing, then we can potentially make more money on the river. And of course, if he's value betting a worse hand, we could allow him some more rope on the river as well. This is the beauty of playing in position. Of course, when you actually have a strong hand, I should say. But it turns out that perhaps raising was the preferred option because the river comes a 3 of diamonds. Now our flush has gone from a very strong hand to almost a bluff catcher. We just have a 6 high flush, and it's very likely our opponent has a better flush at this point. If he was continuing to bet on the turn, the worst hand he might have been doing that with for value is like an overpair with a diamond, or I guess a set we now beat, but you guys get the idea. Not in love with this card. But what's weird is my opponent now checks it over to me, which I didn't expect. This is a strange hand so far. Now it's on me, and of course checking back seems more than okay. But I like to go for thin value whenever I have the chance, and I don't really think my opponent is going to have a flush super often after playing this way. Of course, betting here does put us at risk of a check raise, which is certainly possible. Maybe he's got himself like the nut flush or aces with a diamond, these sorts of hands that try to get me to bluff or bet for value with a worse holding, like I may be doing here. I put in $700, a little more than half the size of the pot, trying to get value from any non-believing hand that doesn't have a diamond, of course. And it seems we might actually have the best hand after we don't get snap called, and I think we definitely do after around a minute or two of my opponent thinking before finally deciding to fold. So we don't get some thin value. It makes me wonder if the bet was even a good decision, but alas, we do take this one down and move to the next hand, in which I straddle for 100 again. Action gets to the small blind, who raises it up to 300, and I am looking down at ace 10 of spades. A beautiful hand, especially blind versus blind, so I raise it up to 900. Small blind makes the call, and we go heads up to this flop of ace king 6, 2 diamonds, and 1 spade. Not bad at all. We've got top pair and a backdoor flush draw. And of course, this is a flop that should favor me heavily. So when my opponent checks, I bet small, $600, and he makes the call. My first impression on this guy is that he's a pretty tight player. So despite the fact that I've got top pair with a decent kicker, I would not be surprised if he's got ace queen or ace jack after calling my re-raise pre-flop and continuing on this flop. So when the river comes to deuce of spades, even though we've now got the nut flush draw to go along with our top pair, I don't really know if there's much value in betting, and our hand is also just too strong to bluff. So after thinking it over, I check it back, and we see a decent river card. It's the deuce of clubs, And if you guys are looking carefully at this flop and Joey didn't mess up the cards during the editing process, you will see that if my opponent's got an ace, we should both have 2 pair with a king kicker, meaning my kicker is no longer playing. And that sparks an idea in my head after my opponent checks it a 3rd time. We could potentially get this guy off of a chop. If he's got ace queen or ace jack, this is a great opportunity to try to steal a pot from him. And if he's got a smaller kicker than a queen or a jack, then the same thought process applies. We're chopping this one up if he's got an ace, assuming it's not ace king or ace 6. So why not, instead of dividing this pot in 2, try to take the whole thing for myself? He's got $6,000 remaining. And by the way, another reason I think this is a great opportunity is because this is just not a board that he's ever going to be super strong on, since I was the last aggressor pre-flop. If he had aces, kings, ace king, I would expect him to re-raise again after I made it 900 pre. So yeah, I'm not too worried about him being super strong. Sure, once in a while we might run into pocket 6s or ace 2, but those hands probably would have bet the river anyway. So after thinking all this through, I do announce all in for double the size of the pot, $6,000 effective, and my opponent does not seem thrilled with this. After thinking it over for 2 or 3 minutes, in fact, he finally decides to give it up and muck his hand. After he thought for so long, I think he probably had an ace, but who knows? We might have had the best hand the whole way. Moving on to the next one, in which I demote my hand strength from ace 10 suited to 9-5, but we are suited again. I raise it up to $100 in early position. Probably shouldn't do this if I'm being honest, but I'm here to have some fun. It's late in the night and I may or may not be in a gambling mood here at the bike. Late position and big blind make the call, so we go 3 ways to a flop of king 8-3 with 1 club. Probably about as good as it gets for my hand. We've got a backdoor flush draw, backdoor trips draw. What else do we got? I think that's about it, but it is a king high board and it's super dry, so should be able to steal this one away with enough pressure as the pre-flop raiser. Big blind checks, I bet $100. Late position calls and the big blind folds. Happy to get it heads up going to the turn, but I definitely would have preferred if the late position player folded and then the big blind called, because if the late position player called with another guy left to act behind him, it's probably a little bit stronger than he otherwise might be. Maybe not. Let's find out. If I turn any card that I think is a good bluff card, I'm going to apply pressure, and sure enough, it is the 7 of diamonds. That means I've got a straight draw. Oh, I forgot to mention that on the flop. We have a backdoor straight draw, guys. So yeah, the 7 means that any 6 on the river would give me essentially the nuts, and that's all the excuse I need. I bet $300 and my opponent folds. So we get this one through. In the next one, the $100 straddle is on once more. It seems like the table is into this double straddle at this point, which is good news to me. There's a middle position open to $250, and I make it $750 in late position with 6-5 of spades. Being in late position, I think calling with a suited connector like this is okay. Not just that, but it also increases our playability post-flop. If we bloat the pot pre-flop with a hand like this and then have to play for stacks later on, it's not really ideal. You know, this kind of hand performs better when you're deep stacked, but contrary to everything I just described, I did re-raise it to 750. Interesting developments here as the big blind cold calls the 750 and the initial raiser folds. Not really what I was expecting, but probably best case scenario. Off to a flop which comes down queen 10-7, and at this point he's only got 2,500 behind, which means we will be able to get the money in on the turn or river, whether through a bluff or a value hand. Let's be honest, looking at this flop, it's probably going to be a bluff. So when he checks, I decide to check it back in hopes that my opponent might think I'm trapping with a set or an overpair, maybe. Turn is great. It's the 4 of clubs, and it has me questioning my decision on the flop to check it back. I definitely did think of betting small and then continuing to bluff on the turn, but sometimes checking back looks stronger than betting the flop. You guys know what I mean? At least against certain player types. But that's just my opinion. Let's see if it's true. My opponent now leads out after thinking it over for a bit. He puts $550 into the pot. And after thinking about this situation, I don't think he's super strong because he just cold called pre-flop. Usually that's indicative of a pocket pair, like let's say 8s through jacks. So yeah, sure, he could have some pocket 10s once in a while, maybe pocket 7s, but I think those hands might have bet a little bit bigger since there are so many draws out there. So I decide to make it look like I'm springing the trap and jam all in for $2,500 total, hoping not to get snap called. And sure enough, he does not snap call. He's got to put in an additional $2,000 to continue in this hand, and he does not seem to love it. At this point, I think it's obvious he's got a hand like pocket jacks or pocket nines, maybe ace 10 suited. These sorts of holdings that we're betting on the turn just to see what was going on. Well, I'm letting you know what's going on, man. I am all in. Sure, I've got 6 high, but it's an open-ended straight draw. And of course, I could still have hands like overpairs and sets since I was the last aggressor pre-flop. My opponent disagrees though, because after a minute or two, he says, screw it, I call. That's not good news for me. He asked me how many times I want to run it. I say, it's up to you, sir. He says 2 times. So off we go to 2 different boards, looking for either an 8 or a 3 to give me a straight. Since that's all we can rely on now, fold equity, no longer a thing, and neither is a straight for me. There's a king on both rivers, and we end up losing this nearly $7,000 pot versus red pocket nines. Okay, I'm going to interrupt the voiceover to tell you guys about a hand that just went down. I didn't really think anything was going to happen, so I didn't film it, but it was a double board PLO bomb pot. I had king 8 of spades and 2 other random cards. The top board had a king, an 8, and another king. The bottom board had 3 spades. And if my memory serves me correctly, by the time the pot was all said and done, it was around $4,000. So that means we won around 2K in that one. Thought it was worth mentioning. Back to the action. In the next one, the $100 double straddle is on yet again. Late position opens to 100, and I make it 500 in the small blind with king 8 suited. Usually king 8, king 7 suited, these sorts of middling suited kings are good enough for a re-raise, but definitely not every time. Something you have to be careful about, in terms of frequency. But anyway, I make it $500, and my opponent makes a call. We go heads up to a flop of king 9 deuce with 1 spade. Not bad at all for getting out of line pre-flop. I continue with a small bet of $350, and my opponent makes the call. Turn card is the 6 of clubs. At this point, I think there's merit to checking and betting. This time, I decide to check it, open the door for my opponent if he wants to value bet a worse hand, or of course, try to bluff the pot from me. But he's too clever for that and checks it back. River is the deuce of clubs. Innocent looking run out here, so I decide to bet for some value. Would also have some bluffs in this line for this sizing, so I put in a bet of around a third. $650. My opponent thinks it over for a little while and folds. So we don't make a ton of money, but still, taking down a pot with king 8 is never a bad thing. In the next one, the straddle is on again for $100. Late position makes it $250, and I am on the button with 8-7 of spades. Once again, just like I said earlier in this vlog, just calling on the button with suited connectors is probably the best play when you're not super deep. And no one at this table was super deep, myself included, actually. However, I did re-raise to $750. I think the reason I was doing this is I've gotten a little bit used to playing on Hustler Casino Live, where people typically have some pretty deep stacks, many chips in front of them. But yeah, shame on me for not adjusting properly in this game. Anyhow, I make it $750, and only the original raiser makes the call. So we go heads up to a flop of queen 9-4. No spade in sight, so not the best board for me. He checks, I bet small, hoping to get a fold from ace highs and such holdings, but no can do. My opponent makes the call, and we see the jack of diamonds on the turn. He checks, and I'm not really sure if this is the situation where I want to go crazy. We don't have a diamond in our hand, and I have removal to the types of holdings I'd want him to fold, like pocket 8s and pocket 7s. So yeah, not the best bluff candidate. I decide to just give it up, so I knuckle it back. And the river is the king of clubs, so no help whatsoever to my hand. Gonna be an interesting spot if he checks to me. I think I'm probably just gonna give up, but we don't even get the chance because he leads out for $1,500 and I fold right away. Moving right along to the next one, in which the $100 double straddle is once again in play. There's a late position open to $250, and I am in the small blind this time with ace queen, a real hand in the small blind to re-raise with. I make it 1,000, and my opponent makes a call. Heads up to a flop, which is absolute chef's kiss for ace queen. It comes ace queen 3 rainbow. Not too often that you re-raise with a big ace pre-flop and flop top 2, right? I bet small, 550 bucks, around a quarter pot, and I'm happy to see my opponent makes a call. I'm not going to lie, I was surprised to see him call because I've got an ace, I've got a queen. What could he possibly have? But hey, I'm not complaining. Turn card is the 9 of diamonds, and, well, it's not rocket science. I've got a strong hand, and I bluff often enough that checking when I actually have something good just seems insane. So I throw in 2 yellow chips totaling $2,000. Sadly, my opponent folds right away. So, yeah, we're making some hands here and there, but not getting a ton of value. But no problem, because this brings us to the last hand of the vlog, which is by far the most action-packed hand of the entire night. So buckle up. The $100 straddle is on once more. There's one limper in early position, and then the player in middle position on his left makes it $350. This time I am on the button with ace-9 suited. And this is the type of hand that I think performs best with a re-raise, despite being on the button. Also, there's the added factor that there is a limper from early position, so the middle position raiser could be getting a little out of line trying to take that money down with his raise to 350. Limper folds, and it turns out maybe he's not out of line because the initial raiser re-raises my raise. He makes it $3,000 to go. Not an ideal situation. He started the hand with around $12,000 or $13,000. So yeah, calling here does not seem like a great play for me. Even though we do have a nice hand and we do have position, there's just so much of his stack already in play that doesn't seem like a worthwhile investment to continue in this hand. But of course, this hand would not be in the vlog if that were the case. I call. Let's see a flop. Maybe we could hit something. Maybe finally we'll play a big pot tonight. And maybe finally I will lose everything I have with me. Flop comes down ace-10-4 rainbow. My opponent seems undeterred, however, because he now continues for $1,500. And well, this is the exact scenario which makes playing weak aces so scary pre-flop for a ton of action. You never know, even if you flop top pair, are we dead? Are we ahead? Who knows? It's just a guessing game. But of course, I didn't play ace-9 pre-flop like this, just a full top pair. So I make the call, and we see the 3 of diamonds on the turn. Now my opponent thinks for a bit and checks it. I think at this point, it's most likely I've got the best hand, not only because, math and all that, but also because if he did have ace-king or pocket tens, ace-10 suited, for example, he probably would continue betting. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the type of player to check ace-king or pocket aces just as well. So yeah, I think the best course of action for me, regardless of what he's got, is to bet small. Could be doing this with all sorts of floats on the flop, like let's say queen jack of diamonds, queen jack of clubs, king jack of spades, these sorts of holdings that call pre-flop and then flop a strong enough hand to call the $1,500 bet and maybe try to steal it on the turn. So anyway, with all that said, I think betting small with almost all my hands is the best course of action here. I put in $2,700 after thinking this through, and my opponent is not done with it just yet. He makes the call. At this point, I'm debating in my head whether or not we are going to be going for some value on this river or just check it back. I'm leaning towards checking it back, but it turns out maybe we have to change plans because it is the 9 of spades, giving me aces up, and now most likely the best hand, because even if he was playing ace-king or maybe ace-queen this way, we of course are now beating those hands. My opponent checks for a second time, and now of course we have a no-brainer all in. He's only got $6,000 behind, maybe even a little less, which of course is no small chunk of money, but considering the size of the pot, it's not even half pot. So of course I jam all in after a few seconds of thought. And my opponent does not snap call, which is, of course, great news. That means we've got the best hand. Now it's just a question of whether or not we are going to be getting the maximum. But it looks like that answer is not coming anytime soon because this hand took an additional 6.5 minutes at this point. In the end, however, my opponent, after much thought, decides to call. That looks like good news, and sure enough, ace-9 is going to take this one down. $26,000 pot, which at a 10-20-40 game is quite a massive pot. Best way to end the night for sure, and of course, we are in Profitville at this point. Like always, I hope you guys enjoyed the hands. Stay tuned for a few of my final thoughts coming right up. All right, so the session just ended. I am in the Lotus room. I don't even know what the Lotus room is. I think this used to be like a high stakes room for poker, but like everything else in LA, it has become Baccarat or Blackjack or something. Anyway, I am happy to report good things. I ended up winning today. I was in for $16,800. That is the amount I had in my bicycle casino balance. Cashed out for a little over 32 grand. So definitely a profitable trip out here to the bicycle casino, and perhaps the last one for quite some time. Live at the Bike is dead. I also just pretty much only play at Hustler now when I am playing in LA, so not really sure when or if I'll be back here, but definitely some good memories in this building. As far as high stakes goes, there's not a lot of available seats for me the remainder of the year. I might try to just have my own private game at some point, but that is tough considering that people are with their families for the holidays, as they should be. But if I can, I'm gonna get 9 degenerates together and we're gonna play some 50-100 or something, and I'll vlog that. And we'll close out the year with that. I will also, as I always do, make a video about my annual results. So all you guys wondering how 2023 went for me, that's gonna be coming out in a vlog real soon. But that's all I gotta say, you guys. Happy holidays. Thank you for watching. Thanks for all the support. And until next time, good luck at your local tables. Peace.